Have you ever entered an establishment that demanded a password for admission? Where law enforcement was compensated to evaporate, where the distilled spirits could literally blind you, where 8-year-old juveniles were remunerated to shield you. It resonates as a motion picture. It is not. It constituted a conventional nocturnal interval within Chicago in 1926. And the 20 facts I am about to disclose are so meticulously documented, so specific, and so absurd that your exclusive complication will be believing they are authentic. Fact 1. The password no one anticipated. Chicago, September 1926. Within the center of Prohibition, the Paradise Club operated behind an unmarked portal, and no one gained entry absent articulating the correct password. But here resides the peculiar component. The password altered every 24 hours, and it was perpetually a line from a religious hymn. Affirmatively, a church hymn employed to admit individuals into a speakeasy. Upon Sunday evening, September 12th, the phrase of the diurnal cycle was "Abide with me." Operating the establishment was Earl Bishop Torrio, a former seminarian who abandoned the trajectory toward the pulpit and concluded within the bootleg whiskey enterprise. He personally selected the phrases, and anyone who articulated it erroneously was ejected upon the instant. That identical evening, 6 federal agents endeavored to gain entry undercover, adopting the neighborhood accent, and concluded immobilized out there upon the walkway. Within that Chicago, even faith functioned as camouflage for criminality. Fact 2. The beverage that authentically paralyzed you. Here resides a narrative your grandfather likely never articulated to you. Throughout Prohibition, there existed an inexpensive beverage circulating within speakeasies designated Jamaica Ginger or merely Jake to the regulars. It cost approximately 10 cents per measure and executed the mechanism for anyone craving a beverage absent expending substantially. But in 1930, certain ingenious manufacturers resolved to amalgamate the formulation with a chemical designated triorthocressyl phosphate, exclusively to deceive government inspectors. The damage was unbelievable. Approximately 50,000 Americans were abandoned, possessing their lower and upper extremities immobilized for the remainder of their existences. Individuals commenced designating the condition Jake leg, and you could identify someone affected by the configuration they ambulated, hauling their feet. And the most outrageous component, no one proceeded to incarceration. No one was prosecuted. The manufacturers merely transferred currency beneath the surface to federal agencies and proceeded with their existences. Fact 3. The most secure speakeasy resided within a church. Now, devote attention to this narrative because it resonances as excessively untamed to be authentic. But it is. Within Detroit, between 1927 and 1929, St. Michael's Lutheran Church possessed a modest secret concealed within the subterranean level. Every Saturday evening, while the complete municipality was evading Prohibition, church members would descend downstairs to consume chilled beer. And the pastor? He managed the currency himself, allocating $2 from every entry as a special tithe. When federal agents finally materialized at the portal in March 1929, they discovered 140 individuals downstairs, 3 barrels of beer, and the pastor positioned there, composed as eternity, possessing the Bible within his lap. The man ambulated free. Why, not a solitary parishioner articulated a syllable against him. After all, who is going to inform upon the individual serving the most exceptional beer within the municipality and simultaneously ensuring you gain admission to the afterlife? Fact 4. Eliot Ness never authentically terminated a speakeasy. Here resides one that might obliterate a childhood protagonist for you. Eliot Ness and the celebrated Untouchables functioned more as a marketing collective than a serious law enforcement apparatus. Between 1930 and 1933, executed exclusively 11 significant operations. They dismantled merely 1 distillery and apprehended 38 individuals. None of them expended more than 18 months behind bars. Meanwhile, Chicago was saturated with approximately 10,000 speakeasies operating at the identical interval adjacent to one another. According to the FBI's own assessments, Ness's contingent scarcely contacted 0.4% of the municipality's illicit liquor commerce. The remainder of the legend, that originated from the newspapers of that epoch, which necessitated merchandising headlines and converted an ordinary agent into an American mythology that Hollywood subsequently embraced absent a secondary contemplation. Fact 5. The menu that salvaged the establishment. Here resides something not numerous individuals recognize. The more sophisticated speakeasies within New York served superior nourishment than a substantial quantity of the municipality's conventional dining establishments, and it was not exclusively for exhibition. It constituted a survival strategy. The police possessed the authority to terminate an illicit establishment, but they could not contact a dining establishment. So the proprietors converted the culinary preparation area into a legal shield. The 21 Club, which inaugurated in 1921 upon 52nd Street, served duck à l'ange, lobster thermidor, and premium filet mignon. Federal agents endeavored to terminate the five, and every occasion they raided it. The proprietors exhibited the adjudicator the menu and articulated, "We are a dining establishment, sir." It functioned every solitary occasion. The 21 Club was never terminated, navigated through the entirety of Prohibition, and persists operational today, exceeding 100 years subsequently. Fact 6. The admonition apparatus for law enforcement raids around 1905. Dutch Schultz conceived a configuration that persists as impressive even presently. He compensated a New York switchboard operator $200 monthly, and she preserved her auditory organ upon police radio communications. The instant a raid was orchestrated, she would contact the speakeasy and extend the code phrase, "Your neighbor is ill." That constituted the signal to displace. From the admonition to the law enforcement striking the portal, they possessed approximately 4 minutes maximum, and believe it. Within 4 minutes, that assembly could execute miracles. They would conceal 200 bottles within a counterfeit subterranean level, invert the tables around, and by the interval the police entered. The establishment had already transformed into a conventional midday nourishment location, possessing individuals consuming sandwiches as though nothing had transpired. Articulated differently, organized criminality was already deploying technology, bribery, and a chronometer, long before Hollywood ever positioned that upon the expansive screen. Fact 7. Who preserved vigilance for the bootleggers here resides something your history volumes likely did not articulate to you regarding Prohibition. Within working-class neighborhoods within New York and Chicago, speakeasy proprietors possessed a rather ingenious admonition apparatus and conjecture who executed the assignment: adolescent males between 8 and 12 years of age. They stationed themselves upon the corner, preserving vigilance, and whenever they observed a law enforcement officer approaching, they would emit a whistle. They generated 50 cents per nocturnal interval. Their designation was canaries. The majority of them constituted the offspring of Italian and Irish immigrants, and a substantial quantity of that currency proceeded directly toward financing educational instruction. 1928, the Chicago Tribune executed a survey and discovered 847 adolescent males executing that assignment upon a consistent basis. The component that persists in disturbing individuals presently, not a solitary adult was conducted to tribunal for exploiting those juveniles. No one compensated for it. Fact 8. The medicinal whiskey physicians prescribed here reside something not numerous individuals recognize. Prohibition possessed a colossal loophole. Alcohol for medicinal application was still lawful. In 1921, the federal government issued 57,000 authorizations permitting physicians to prescribe the celebrated medicinal whiskey. Within the inaugural year alone, 11 million doses were prescribed through physicians' offices, and here resides the deranged component. Within Detroit, solitary physician endorsed whiskey prescriptions for 411 patients within merely one diurnal cycle, all of them ostensibly suffering from cardiac complications. Coincidence? Arduous to believe. Behind the most substantial pharmacy chain distributing that therapeutic alcohol resided none other than Meyer Lansky, one of the masterminds of organized criminality. The scheme imported $3 million annually, a fortune at that interval. While ordinary individuals were being apprehended over a beer, the substantial figures were accumulating wealth, possessing the law's own endorsement. Fact 9. The legislators who consumed while legislating here resides a narrative that will abandon you speechless. Directly within the cardiac organ of Washington, D.C., within the celebrated Willard Hotel, there existed a speakeasy operating upon the 8th floor. And acquire this, it persisted operational nonstop from 1920 to 1933, directly beneath the law's olfactory organ. Now, here resides the untamed component. Who was consuming there? 31 seated senators, 89 members of Congress, 2 cabinet secretaries, and 3 Supreme Court justices. Affirmatively, the identical men fabricating the nation's statutes were the ones violating them most extensively. And the most substantial particular of all, one of those justices had voted to preserve prohibition within the Constitution. The guest registry possessing all the designations was incinerated in 1934, likely to safeguard individuals' reputations, but several photographic records endured. And to this diurnal cycle, they still exhibit the hypocrisy of the individuals operating the nation. Fact 10. Corruption possessed a valuation schedule within Chicago during the 1920s. Bribery transformed into an organized enterprise possessing a fixed valuation schedule, resembling a dining establishment menu. The mafia seated themselves with the police and negotiated the rates manually. Modest Speakeasy, $75 monthly. Intermediate dimensioned, $200. The substantial ones compensated $500. No inquiries posed. The arrangement incorporated protection from raids and even superior, a telephone communication admonishing them when inspectors were en route. Al Capone even possessed an individual designated chief of police exclusively to accumulate the currency. Accumulated entirely. And Chicago speakeasies were pouring $75 million annually into bribes, approximately $1.3 billion within contemporary valuation. Fact 11. The speakeasy that transformed into a legend absent ever existing here resides one of the most intelligent maneuvers of the Prohibition epoch. In 1923, all of New York was discoursing regarding the Elfay Club. Newspapers referenced the location. Society columns discoursed regarding who had been observed there, and even celebrities asserted they had consumed beverages there. There existed merely one particular. The Elfay Club never existed. It was entirely fabricated by columnist Walter Winchell, who generated the counterfeit address to divert the police and safeguard the authentic focal point, the Silver Slipper. For 2 complete years, federal agents operated around searching for an establishment that exclusively existed upon documentation. Meanwhile, the Silver Slipper was serving whiskey to 300 patrons per nocturnal interval, 6 nocturnal intervals weekly, absent ever being raided. Substantiation that during that epoch, a proficient fabrication was worth more than any locking mechanism upon the portal. Fact 12. Ice. The most profitable commodity here resides a narrative no one articulated to you regarding prohibition. During the 1920s, ice was worth gold within significant American municipalities. A 100-pound block cost approximately $1.50, but a chilled beverage within a speakeasy could import 8 times that quantity. And there exists more. The identical transports delivering ice through the thoroughfares of New York and Chicago were transporting whiskey concealed within the posterior. Identical operators, identical routes, identical schedules. When the police detained them, they examined the ice upon the superior surface and motioned them through. Scarcely anyone ever inspected the foundation of the transport bed. That is how the ice industry expanded 340% between 1920 and 1929. Within municipalities saturated with speakeasy. Ice was not exclusively regarding preserving beverages chilled. It constituted camouflage. It constituted a facade. It constituted the silent associate within the most substantial smuggling operation this nation had ever witnessed. Fact 13. The nocturnal interval all of Chicago transformed arid on October 14, 1924. Recently elected Mayor William Deaver resolved to manufacture history. He mobilized 4,000 police officers within a coordinated operation, striking every recognized speakeasy within the municipality at the identical interval. It appeared as the concluding strike against the underworld. By solar ascension, 2,081 establishments had been terminated, and 2,200 individuals were positioned behind bars. Newspapers celebrated it as a triumph for the law. But then arrived the component no one anticipated. Within merely 7 diurnal cycles, 100 novel speakeasies inaugurated at distinct addresses. The illicit liquor commerce expanded 12% the subsequent month. Mayor Deaver examined the outcome, swallowed with intensity, and never attempted anything resembling that again. Chicago had transmitted an unambiguous communication. You can apprehend the man, but you cannot arrest an entire municipality from being parched. Fact 14. The champagne that constituted authentically vinegar in 1926. The Bureau of Prohibition resolved to investigate what was authentically being poured into vessels at New York speakeasies. They accumulated 500 receptacles being merchandised as imported French champagne and dispatched them to the laboratory. The outcomes abandoned everyone stunned. Exclusively 6% were authentic champagne. 31% constituted inexpensive wines possessing counterfeit designations. 41% constituted a perilous amalgamation of industrial alcohol, citric acid, and injected carbon dioxide. And acquire this, 22% were literally vinegar, possessing artificial bubbles. The valuation, $12 per receptacle, the equivalent of approximately $210 today. And the most deranged component, patrons consumed it, contacted their labial structures, and swore they could detect the authentic essence of Paris. The majority of them had never consumed champagne within their existences, and possessed no conception what they were authentically ingesting within that gilded epoch of bootlegging. Fact 15. The dancer who functioned as a federal agent scarce individuals recognized this, but one of the most acute weapons within the Prohibition Bureau donned elevated heels and served beverages. Zona Gale constituted one of the inaugural female federal agents, and between 1923 and 1926, she infiltrated 14 speakeasies by presenting as a dancer and server. Upon her own, she assisted in positioning 47 speakeasy proprietors behind bars. The configuration was elementary and ingenious. She accepted the occupation, labored for approximately 3 weeks, inscribed everything regarding the operation, departed silently, and returned subsequently possessing a warrant within her grasp. Even possessing that record, the Bureau never publicly acknowledged her labor. Her superior believed women possessed no position within the field. Fact 16. The speakeasy that persisted operational for 13 years, absent ever sealing its portals, permit me to articulate a narrative not numerous individuals recognize. Within New York, upon 52nd Street, there existed an establishment designated the 21 Club. It inaugurated in December 1922, directly within the center of Prohibition. And here resides the extraordinary component. It did not seal for a solitary nocturnal interval throughout the subsequent 13 years. Affirmatively, 4,030 uninterrupted diurnal cycles. The proprietors, Jack Crindler and Charlie Burns, were intelligent. They expended $300,000, a fortune at that interval, upon a motion picture-worthy security apparatus. There existed a clandestine wine cellar that exclusively unsealed by activating a concealed lever, a specialized conduit apparatus that could obliterate every receptacle within seconds if the police materialized at the portal, and counterfeit barriers fabricated from solid steel. When Prohibition concluded in 1933, do you recognize what they executed? They merely unsealed the anterior portal and persisted in serving whiskey out within the open, as though nothing had transpired. Fact 17. The currency that acquired adjudicators, here resides a numeral that will abandon you stunned. Between 1924 and 1930 within Cook County, where Chicago resides, 73% of criminal cases connected to speakeasies concluded within exoneration. Affirmatively, virtually 3 out of every 4 defendants ambulated free. It appeared as conjuring, but it was authentically currency exchanging possession. In 1928, the Department of Justice resolved to excavate more profoundly, and what they discovered was nauseating. Out of the county's 17 tribunal adjudicators, 12 were upon the mafia's payroll, receiving between $500 and $2,000 per case. A fortune during that epoch. 3 of those adjudicators were indicted. One of them struck the thoroughfare and dissolved into Mexico before the proceedings. The alternative 2 were exonerated by their fellow adjudicators positioned upon the very identical tribunal. American justice possessed evaluation, and organized criminality compensated in currency. Fact 18. The whiskey that ambulated out through the pharmacy portal here resides a narrative not numerous individuals recognize. In 1920, when Prohibition commenced, Walgreens possessed exclusively 20 establishments across the nation. 9 years subsequently, in 1929, that numeral had leaped to an extraordinary 505. So, how did a pharmaceutical chain expand that substantially throughout the precise interval when alcohol was prohibited? The response resided within a loophole within the legislation. So-called medicinal whiskey, merchandised possessing a physician's prescription. A 1932 internal audit exhibited that 40% of Walgreens' revenue originated from alcohol-based commodities. Charles Walgreen, the founder, refused to provide testimony before Congress that identical year. And when Prohibition finally concluded in 1933, Walgreens was already the most substantial pharmaceutical chain within the United States, constructed within substantial portion upon shelves saturated with receptacles. Fact 19. When the police themselves consumed the evidence on July 15, 1929 within Detroit, federal agents executed what appeared as one of the most substantial prohibition raids of that summer. They assaulted warehouses, dismantled bootleggers, and departed possessing no less than 30,000 receptacles of illicit liquor. Everything was transported to the evidence chamber at the 5th Precinct and secured tightly. At minimum, that is what they articulated. Now acquire this. Within merely 3 weeks, 28,000 of those receptacles simply evaporated from the official documentation. The investigation that succeeded uncovered something nauseating. The police themselves were re-merchandising the confiscated alcohol to the identical bootleggers they had apprehended merely diurnal cycles earlier. A flawless configuration, profitable and outrageous. The precinct chief concluded being dismissed, but here resides the component individuals still cannot digest. Not a solitary officer was apprehended, and not one of them expended a solitary diurnal cycle behind bars. Fact 20. The diurnal cycle prohibition concluded, and no one authentically celebrated December 5, 1933, 5:32 post-meridiem. Utah transformed into the 36th state to ratify the 21st Amendment, and merely like that, prohibition officially concluded within the United States. But pause until you absorb what transpired subsequently. Al Capone was deteriorating within the Atlanta penitentiary, consumed by syphilis and already forfeiting his cognition. Elliot Ness, the man who pursued him, was unemployed, and the proprietors of the substantial speakeasies, the identical individuals who had constructed coast-to-coast distribution networks. They merely acquired authorization, preserved the identical transports, the identical routes, the identical patrons, and proceeded with enterprise, presently lawfully. The exclusively phenomenon that authentically concluded was the deranged prophet. Criminality did not vacate the platform, it merely altered its garments. Hollywood merchandised you the aesthetically pleasing iteration for 90 years. Presently recognize the authentic one.